Lots of news to talk about today, including signs of DLSS 5 in the latest Nvidia drivers. Witcher 3 is getting new system requirements on PC. What's up with that? Well, that's because we're getting new Witcher 3 DLC after all of these years, probably trying to set up the Witcher 4 story, I would guess. We're also seeing the Nvidia control panel finally being removed and replaced fully by the Nvidia App. And Hardware Unboxed had a very timely video about the Nvidia app and the settings and all of that you might want to check out. Also, there's signs that AMD's RX 9070 GRE, which has previously been China region exclusive, could be about to hit a global launch. More thoughts on that about, this card's already out in China, so reviews are already available. And then we could think about current market pricing on various GPUs and price to performance comparisons and all of that. There's also signs that there may be a Ryzen 7 7700X3D incoming soon, given that support has been added to CPU-Z for that chip. Bad news and good news. Hey, Steam Decks are back in stock. Good news. Bad news, models are up to $300 more expensive. And how will that play into the broader handheld PC market as we're starting to see some competition coming from Intel with their new Arc G3 Extreme, which is designed for handhelds. I think this could be pretty promising and pretty stiff competition for the AMD-based handhelds. But again, pricing right now in this economy. Also, Windows 11 is getting its CPU boost or low latency feature rolling out soon, and you can enable that. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4 has been announced and has discussed some of its PC-specific features, including expanded ray tracing support and things like that. And as I mentioned in my last video, my 5090 connector melted, and I do have some closer up photos of that since I wasn't able to get a really nice shot of that in my video on the topic. Let's come around to the beginning. All sources will be linked in the video description, and if I have time before my kids get home, I'll try to timestamp all of the topics for your convenience. Anyway, so Nvidia DLSS 5 settings appear in the latest drivers. I found this at DSO Gaming. All sources will be linked in the video description. Looks like they got some of this from Guru 3D's War Kratos. And so what this is basically if you use NVIDIA Profile Inspector, you can then see some new listings mentioning DLSS NR override, which you would assume means neural rendering. So DLSS neural rendering override, neural rendering SL override, and then override DLSS NR presets. So this certainly seems like it's preparing for an Nvidia app update to now offer neural rendering overrides for DLSS. So we've already seen that, DLSS upscaling can have overrides in the Nvidia app to update to the latest version, like DLSS 4.5, if a game actually only had DLSS 3 in it or something like that. And you can select different presets with different models like K and L and M that have different image quality characteristics and also performance characteristics. Same thing with frame generation and ray reconstruction. So it's looking like DLSS NR, which we would assume probably refers to neural rendering, is probably talking about DLSS 5 because that is how NVIDIA has described DLSS 5, is as neural rendering. Now again, this seems to be a very different technology than previous versions of DLSS, where DLSS previously has always seemed to be a mostly performance-related feature, especially with its initial upscaling, application where you get faster performance, and then machine learning tries to target a ground truth native image output, but rendering at a lower resolution to boost performance. That's kind of, the original idea behind DLSS. This seems very different in that, as far as we can tell, it's probably going to be a lot less performant, for one thing, because the demo they've done this on ran on two 5090s, one to render the game and one to apply the, neural rendering path. But then also because with upscaling, you have a ground truth native image as a target for what you're trying to achieve with the output. Whereas with DLSS 5, there's more of just a image generator algorithm that is trying to target what it believes to be more photorealism in the materials and the lighting and everything like that. But that means it's not based on a ground truth image that has been created by the game developers, unlike what DLSS has previously been trying to do. Instead, this is then relying on the the AI, the generative AI, basically to decide what it thinks the target image should be, right? Which is going to be heavily influenced by its training data and weighting and like that. And NVIDIA has talked about some controls that the developers could have on that, but certainly they seem somewhat limited, at least in what they've been able to describe as expecting for the initial launch of it. So naturally, this has been extremely controversial. I've already talked about this a lot on the channel. All of the ways in which this is controversial regarding artistic intent, and is this how we want games to look, all of that. Also regarding how is it going to perform, all of that. But anyway, it sounds like there are signs now that this is moving forward. Now, one thing that's interesting is these presets. So what would those presets be? Like, is it going to be like performance stuff where maybe to get this to run on less powerful GPUs than a 5090, they're going to have lesser quality generative AI or something like that that's faster to run on other GPUs? That's interesting what those presets might be. Or could they be presets that are actually like different artistic styles? Like, could they almost have this be like a filter to just make the game have a completely different look? Could you just want everything to suddenly look like a cel-shaded game and have the generative AI just make it a cel-shaded game? Could that be what the presets do? There's all sorts of things that a technology like this could do with presets that you could override. So curious. But anyway, I'm also not quite sure what would the SL be. Anyway, now, if you're wondering, can you enable these now through NVIDIA Profile Inspector? They don't seem to do anything right now. But the fact that this is showing up now in those profiles means that this is probably coming soon. And remember, NVIDIA, with their initial announcement, did say that they were targeting a fall 2026 release for this. So we are getting closer and closer to that date. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, and also interesting to see, how do people feel about it once they're actually playing with it in games versus seeing the, side-by-side showcases and all that. Anyway, let's move on. I don't need to rehash all of the DLSS 5 thoughts and debates at this point. Like I said, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt has got new PC system requirements alongside the Songs of the Past DLC, or expansion pack, as they're referring it to it, in more of the older fashioned version of DLC. I remember when games got expansion packs, and that was the DLC. Anyway, so I think that's really cool. I think it's awesome that a game, this old is getting what seems to be a major expansion at this point to kind of drum up enthusiasm for the upcoming sequel. I think that's really cool, and I'm hopeful that they're able to, show the direction the stories go in and like tie these in together really well. So I'm hopeful for this. And the studio that's working on this does seem to be, while it's not CD Projekt, I think it's CD Projekt plus another studio. The studio is former CD Projekt developers. It is being co-developed with Fool's Theory. So Fool's Theory seems to be former CD Projekt developers who did work on Witcher 3. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, regarding the system requirements, it's not like everything's going super crazy modern, you need some beast of a PC to run it, but this certainly is updates. Also, they're now only officially supporting Windows 11, and they're only officially supporting DX12 capable GPUs. That being said, it looks like you could run an older build of the game if you aren't able to run the new system requirements, but that means that the game wouldn't officially support those older builds and hardware. Same thing with like requiring an SSD now. So I wouldn't read this as the game won't run on a hard disk drive anymore. I think I would read this as they're no longer officially testing and supporting the older minimum requirements. So if the game was already running on previous minimum requirements, you could still run at least, maybe not the new expansion, but at least run the the game as it existed previously on the previous minimum requirements, but they're no longer, testing the new content on that new stuff. And I would imagine that the new expansion could end up being more graphically demanding and hardware demanding than the previous game and expansions. That's kind of how I would read this. They're now saying you'd want a Ryzen 5 2600, Intel Core i5 8400 on the CPU side of things, a GTX 1660 or RX 5500 XT minimum for the GPU side of things, with at least 6 gigabytes of VRAM and at least 12 gigabytes of system RAM. And like I said, they are now wanting an SSD and Windows 11. But like I said, a lot of this is saying that they're no longer testing and supporting those older stuff, but that doesn't mean it couldn't actually run on Windows 10, for example. They're just no longer officially testing that and guaranteeing it. Yeah, like I said in the intro news, brief, the Nvidia control panel is retiring. Now, that's kind of a big deal, but this has been really a slow roll, and we knew this was coming. The Nvidia app has been slowly being updated to offer all of the things that the control panel did and do a bunch of other stuff, like the aforementioned, overrides for DLSS and all of that. So already for quite a while now, the Nvidia app has done a bunch of stuff that the control panel didn't, but for a while there were certain things that were only available in the control panel. It's looking like they now find that all of the stuff that you need to do on an Nvidia GPU, they feel like is in the Nvidia app, and then some, and they are now winding this down, although RTX Pro users appear to be not affected yet at this time. Now, if you've been avoiding the Nvidia app and just relying on the control panel, and now you're gonna have to learn how to use it, like I mentioned, Hardware Unboxed did just a couple of days ago make a video on this is how you should configure the Nvidia app. And they run through most of the important things that you would need to find, like if you've been using the control panel to enable like G-Sync or something like that. Where do you find that in the Nvidia app? That kind of question. So I'd point you in this direction if you're gonna have to make that move to the Nvidia app. Now, there are signs that the RX 9070 GRE is about to have a global launch. Videocards.com is expecting it before Computex, which would be quite soon. Their evidence for this is that there have been listings of versions of these cards that have English language on them and on English language retailers showing up and then being delisted as well, indicating that there could be some embargo or something like that may have been violated. Now, so that seems to be what videocards.com here is claiming. So if a 9070 GRE was coming to a global launch, a big question then would be like pricing, and because performance isn't a question. These cards already exist. They've been out for almost a year now in the China region. So there's already been outlets like Computer Base that have already benchmarked the 9070 GRE like last July. So where did it line up performance-wise? It looks like it's not as powerful as a 5070, but it's pretty close. And it's more powerful than a 5060 Ti or a 9060 XT. In ray tracing, it's also, again, more powerful than a 5060 Ti and but less powerful than a 5070, with maybe it swinging a little bit more in the Nvidia direction on these ray tracing tests. But ray tracing performance depends a lot on which game you're talking about. So those benchmarks can kind of go all over the place depending on what exactly you're testing. So let's think about this then for a second. So I'm really curious from the audience, what price would make sense to you for a card like this? So what is the 9070 GRE? Again, it's already known what this is and its performance level. It's a 12 gigabyte card, which means it has a cut down memory bus compared to the 9070 and the 9070 XT. So to be clear, in the hierarchy, the 9070 is noticeably more powerful than the 9070 GRE, and the 9070 XT is much more powerful than that. With the cut down memory bus, it only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM and lower memory bandwidth. But in the current market, with VRAM being so expensive, perhaps that helps with the pricing, right? This should be more powerful than even the 16 gigabyte 9060 XT, but it only comes with 12 gigabytes, which is a bit of a downside, but it's overall more raw performance. So that's where that falls. Now, if you look at it based on computer bases benchmarks from about a year ago using Chinese models, but you wouldn't expect a huge difference. It was 78.7 FPS on the 9070 and 68.7 on their 9070 GRE, making the 9070 non-GRE and non-XT about 15% faster, 14.5% faster. Now, in the current market, the 9070 non-XT costs about $600 for the least expensive models. So if you look at it from that perspective, if you take the $600 and you divide by the performance advantage that the 9070 non-GRE has, you would come out with 523.76. In other words, to have about the same price to performance ratio as the 9070 non-GRE and non-XT, it would need to come in at about $525 if you're comparing it to the 9070. Now, the other card in AMD's lineup you could compare it with, and again, using computer bases benchmark data from last July, you could also compare it with the 9060 XT, the card that it sits below it in the lineup. So in this same suite of benchmarks from computer base, it's at 53.5 FPS. The 9070 GRE was at 68.7. So if we do that calculation, it's looking like the 9070 GRE will be significantly faster than a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. Looks like about 28.4% faster. Now, in the current market, if we look at the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, at least in the US market, these are coming in at about $450, and then they go up from there. So if we look at it from that perspective, you would take the slower 9060 XT at $450 and multiply it by the performance advantage for the 9070 GRE, and you come out with $577.85. So in other words, about $575. So basically, depending on which way you look at it, if it was going to match the performance per dollar of AMD's current lineup, those are the two numbers that we get. To match the performance per dollar of the 9070, it would have to be about $525. And to match the performance per dollar of the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte, it would have to be about $575. So that's how the calculations line up compared to AMD's current lineup. So we don't have an announced price, but you might expect something in that range based on price to performance. But that's also coming with a bit of a caveat, right? Because both of these cards that I'm comparing it against have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, whereas this only has 12. That is a downgrade. So how do you factor that into the value comparison? So this is where I'd be curious from you guys in the comment section. What do you think the price needs to be for this to be interesting? Would you just want it to fall somewhere in this range? Or because it's a 12 gigabyte card, would you want it to be priced more aggressively? $500? Less? I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know in the comment section. Speaking of other cards that haven't been officially announced, but, well, not card this time, this case CPU, but other parts, the Ryzen 7 7700X3D has been added to CPU-Z. Now, that's not the same thing as an official announcement, but it could mean that it's coming soon. And there have been some other leaks talking about this possibly coming out. So there's a lot of signs that there could be a 7700 X3D incoming. And again, I'd be curious, assuming this is a little bit less performant than a 7800 X3D, but still fairly performant, where would you want that to find, fall price-wise? If we look at the CPU lineups in the current market, the current fastest, CPUs would be the 9800 X3D, or you could do the 9850 X3D, which is less of a value, but that's at $475. The 9800 X3D at $439. But then if you compare it to the previous gen with the 7800 X3D, That's coming in at around 367, 375, depending on it. Looks like if it's coming as the tray or with the box cooler. So where would we want a 7700X3D to be interesting? Obviously less than these prices, so would it be interesting at 350, or is that not enough of a discount? Obviously we'd have to see what is the performance difference, but I wouldn't expect it to be massively slower than the 7800X3D. So anyway, I'd be interesting where this would need to be priced. To be something exciting, right? Because you'd need to convince somebody maybe who already has like a RX, not RX, like a Ryzen, sorry, 7600 or something like that to want to upgrade to this. So we'd have to see where that needs to be priced. Speaking of pricing, yeah, the Steam Deck OLED is back in stock, but not at amazing prices. Looks like the 512 gigabyte model is now $789. That's directly from Valve. That's just where the prices are now. It used to be $549 for comparison, and the 1 terabyte version used to be $649. It's now up to $949. So that is a $300 increase for the 1 terabyte model. And, not quite $300 increase, but still pretty significant for the 512 gigabyte model. That's brutal, man. Especially given that, the actual hardware specs in these things is getting a little outdated. You can still play a ton of games on it, but I'm really looking for a new AMD APU that has more performance and has FSR4 support, which we don't have. I want that, but that's where these new Intel handhelds are getting pretty interesting. Intel's new Arc G3 Extreme should have some pretty good gaming performance, and it supports XeSS upscaling like the XMX version, which has good quality upscaling. So that's pretty interesting here. We're seeing a model announced from 1X Player with the 1X Player 3, which would be an 8.8-inch OLED. Videocards.com, again, all my sources in the video description, has as many specs as we know about right here kind of listed. Seems like it could be interesting, but we don't know the price yet, so that's going to be a big deciding factor. And then Acer has a Predator Atlas 8 unveiled, which also features the Intel Arc G3 chips and 24 gigabytes of memory. Again, they have some specs of that listed along with some other Acer models and things that you can compare against. But again, we don't know what the pricing is going to look like on that. Now, a while back, we had some discussion of a new Windows 11 update that would be a lower latency for launching apps and things like that by allowing the CPU to boost momentarily faster. And it's looking like that is rolling out. And this article here from windowslatest.com does have some information about how you could go about enabling that low latency profile. If you're interested in doing so, you could follow this link in the video description. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4 has been announced and has discussed a lot of changes, including some PC-specific stuff. They're promising the usual, PC optimizations for performance and supporting all the latest frame generation and upscaling features and all of that. They've also mentioned some expanded ray tracing support in campaign, multiplayer, and DMZ with improved performance across ray traced reflections, because they were not very performant in the previous one, and they were only available in the multiplayer, so it's that doesn't make sense. So I think it's good that if you're gonna have ray tracing in Call of Duty, it should probably be in the single player campaign. And it would be nice if it was more performant. And it looks like they're also adding in ambient occlusion, shadows, and volumetrics, higher fidelity VFX, volumetric settings, all sorts of stuff. So that's interesting. I'm not going to go too much into this. It looks like it will have Nintendo Switch 2 support, and I think this is also the first Call of Duty that won't support all the way consoles back to the PlayStation 4. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a higher floor for the minimum system requirements and what the performance will look like. So there's some questions there. It does sound like their campaign is going to be trying to target more of a traditional single-player campaign and not the weird kind of co-op thing that they did with the last version, so there's all of that. And like I mentioned, here's some higher quality photos of my melted 5090 connector. Reminder, this was a review sample from Nvidia, and they are replacing it. So I'd be a lot more upset about this if I was out $4,000 buying a replacement. So yeah, I think this just once again highlights that this connector design just doesn't seem to be nearly as reliable as using, multiple 8-pin connectors. So while I understand the appeal of a sleeker, smaller connector for visual aesthetic reasons, personally, I am much more concerned about stability of my card and not having to, if you buy one of these, have to try to RMA it, and then are the RMAs going to be honored? On comments on my video talking about this issue said that some people have had this problem, tried to RMA their cards and had to fight for it, and some people said that theirs were denied. And then even if you get an RMA approved, you're now going to be out of your GPU for a while. Do you use the PC for work? Because that's a problem. Do you use it for gaming? Still a problem. You want to use your PC for gaming. How long is the RMA going to take? So by moving to a design that is clearly, even if we don't have specific numbers on what percentage of these are failing, it's clearly many more and a much higher percentage than were failing with the previous 8-pin connector design. So no, using 4 8-pin connectors wouldn't look as nice as this connector, but I'd rather have to deal with that visual issue than have to deal with an RMA, or worst case scenario, getting denied an RMA or something, or your card failing once it's out of warranty. Because what if this happens 3 or 4 years down the line? A 5090 specifically is going to be very relevant performance-wise for, I would imagine, another decade or more. Note that, think about even the 4090 as well, which was also having issues with these. 4090 is still the second most powerful GPU. And that's going on 4 years old now, right? The 4090 is going to be easily a top performing GPU for many more years within its lifespan. So will the 5090, even more so. And if these connectors melt when you're out of warranty, that's a problem, right? So anyway, this is just once again highlighting the problem with moving to a connector that is more visually pleasing, but very clearly has more a higher failure rate. This is a serious problem, and I would highly, pressure anybody making decisions on this to offer at least some models of the GPUs enable AIB manufacturers to use 8-pin designs if they want to. That's what I would like, because my understanding is that it seems like there's requirements from Nvidia for AIB cards to use this connector other than on certain specific models. I think my 5060 Ti's have 8-pin connectors, things like that. So I would just like it at least to be an option for AIB manufacturers to choose to offer a bunch of 8-pin connectors instead of this design on certain models, and then let the market decide. If consumers prefer to buy this connector despite concerns over its stability, then so be it. That's their decision. It would be nice if there was an alternative that had the 8-pin connectors. So if we had 5090s available with both options, that would be cool. Let the market decide what connector they prefer. That's what I would ask for if they really want to keep pushing this connector. Because honestly, I would prefer just a better connector. But if they're going to keep offering some version of this connector, I would like there to also be the option in the open market for consumers to make their decision on which one they want to go with, aesthetics or reliability. And when you're spending thousands of dollars on a GPU, I think a lot of people would choose reliability. Anyway, all right, I think that's enough for today's video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.